Story number 1. The 13th Pump. I've never been the type to scare easy, but then again, I never believed I'd come face to face with a nightmare at a lonely desert gas station. It happened in the dead of summer, on a highway through the Nevada desert. A road so long and desolate that radio stations faded into static for hours at a time. I was heading south, chasing a rumor about a ghost town that never made it to the maps, hoping to do a piece for my paranormal blog. Instead, I found a far darker story, a story about station number 13, a place I wish I could erase from my memory. My car, a battered old Jeep, was my only companion on that isolated stretch of road. Daytime heat shimmered in the distance, making the asphalt look like a slick black river. The sun burned overhead, relentless. Sometimes, a lizard would dart across the highway, or a vulture would circle above. But mostly, there was just me and the unending desert. I'd read about station number 13 online, in a half-baked forum thread about urban legends. Drivers who stopped there apparently vanished, leaving their vehicles behind. The place had no official listing, no name in any modern directory. Just a handful of rumors scrawled across different corners of the internet. Don't stop at the 13th pump, one post had said. Another insisted, it's never open for long. If you see lights on, keep driving. I laughed it off as typical ghost story nonsense. Still, after hours on that lonely route, I started to glance at my fuel gauge more often. My Jeep guzzled gas, and the next known station was still 100 miles away. When the needle dipped below a quarter tank, a hollow tension built in my chest. I needed fuel soon, or I'd be stranded in the scorching desert. That was the last thing I wanted. The late afternoon sun dipped behind a ridge of red rock. The sky glowed purple, the temperature dropping rapidly. My Jeep sputtered slightly on a hill, and I cursed. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a battered sign at the side of the road. Station number 13, 1 mile. The sign leaned at an angle, the lettering chipped. My heart thumped. The rumors were real after all. Yet how could I ignore it, with my gauge inching toward empty? I had no choice. Maybe I'd find a spooky old station with some crusty attendant, fill up, and be on my way. Urban legend be damned, I needed gas. I flicked on my headlights. The twilight thickened, painting the desert in a violet hush. My mouth felt dry as cotton. I told myself not to be spooked, but the memory of all those vanishings gnawed at me. You'll be fine, I thought. Just get gas and go. As I crested a small rise, the silhouette of a gas station came into view, a squat building with a rusted canopy, a single flickering fluorescent tube casting an anemic light across 2 fuel pumps. A tall sign soared above it, reading simply, gas in peeling letters. No brand name, no price display. I pulled in slowly, feeling a tremor in my stomach. The asphalt around the pumps was cracked, dotted with desert weeds. A battered vending machine stood outside, humming faintly. The windows of the station building were covered by old metal shutters, but a dim glow leaked from the edges. No other vehicles in sight. Drawing closer, I noticed a curious detail. The pumps were numbered. Usually, you see 1, 2, maybe 3. But these pumps each had a small metal plate. The far left read pump number 12. The other, on the right, read pump number 14. And in the middle, unlit, stood a single pump labeled pump number 13. My mind flashed to the warnings I'd read. The station itself was an entire labyrinth of superstition. I parked near pump number 12, deciding I'd be safer with that number than the dreaded number 13. Leaving the engine running, I hopped out, expecting to see an ancient card reader or a stack of dusty pay here signs. Instead, the pump looked fairly modern, digital readouts. I reached for the nozzle, then paused, noticing that the handle was ice cold to the touch, despite the desert heat. Strange, but maybe the underground tanks were cooled? After a moment's struggle, I realized the pump wasn't functional. A small LED read offline. Perfect. My heart sank. I glanced around the station's perimeter, no other pumps except number 13 and number 14. Number 14 was similarly dark, with an out-of-order sign taped over it. That left number 13. A wave of unease rippled through me. But I needed gas, or I'd be stranded. So I walked to pump number 13. Its battered digital display flickered feebly. The pump's nozzle lay in its cradle, looking half-rusted. Painted across the metal in faint script was a warning, "Do not use." It was scratched out. Swallowing my anxiety, I tried pressing the keypad to see if it would authorize. The display blinked error. Great. I sighed. Perhaps I'd have to go inside, talk to the clerk or whoever worked here. If there was a clerk. Pushing open the door to the station, I expected a wave of stale air. Instead, a surprisingly cool gust greeted me. The interior lighting was dim, the overhead fluorescents flickering, creating a strobe-like effect that made the aisles look unnervingly alive. Rows of dusty snacks, ancient soda bottles, random automotive supplies. A single checkout counter in the corner, draped in shadows. "Hello?" I called. No answer. The place was eerily quiet, but I smelled a faint odor, something between musty old cloth and rancid grease. Stepping deeper inside, I noticed the walls were plastered with out-of-date posters for local tourist traps. A radio behind the counter hissed static. Then, from somewhere behind the shelves, a faint voice, "Help you?" I jolted. The voice was so soft I wondered if I'd imagined it. Yeah, I replied, rounding the corner. I found a figure standing behind the register, wearing a grimy coverall with the station's name, #13, emblazoned in red. The figure was tall, painfully thin, with a face half lost in the gloom. It might have been a man, though I couldn't see any details of his features under the shadow of a cap. "Need gas," I said, forcing a smile. "Pump number 12 doesn't work, number 14's out of order, and number 13, well, there's a sign that says do not use. I'm running low, so can you turn on one of them?" The attendant was motionless for a moment. Then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, "Use number 13. A chill prickled my arms. "But, it says not to." He said nothing, just slid a yellow key across the counter. "Power's out. You must start the generator. In back. Then pump #13 will work." I opened my mouth to protest, but the man turned away, stepping into the gloom behind the stockroom door. The door creaked shut, leaving me alone. The radio behind the counter crackled, bursting with faint static and what sounded like whispering voices. I stared at the key in my hand. Why was I going along with this? Because I had no choice, I told myself. My Jeep was nearly on fumes. I needed gas. And yes, the entire vibe reeked of something sinister, but I'd come too far to retreat now. The back door of the station led into a fenced yard. Trash bins, old tires, a row of propane cylinders. The desert night pressed in from all sides, the sky moonless. Following a narrow path, I found a weathered shed. The smell of diesel hung in the air. Unlocking the padlock with the yellow key, I stepped inside. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a hulking generator coated in dust. A tangle of cables snaked from it, leading to a circuit breaker on the wall. I fiddled with the controls. The generator coughed. After a few tries, it roared to life, flooding the yard with mechanical noise. Flickers of light danced from the station's windows. At least something was working. A faint scraping sound behind me made me spin around. No one there. Just the wind, maybe. But it felt like a presence, close enough to raise goosebumps on my neck. Returning to the main deck, I saw that pump number 13 was now lit, its screen displaying zeros, ready for input. The attendant was nowhere in sight. I glanced inside the station, darkness behind the counter. The radio was silent. Approaching number 13, I felt the air grow colder again. My breath plumed. Desert nights get chilly, sure, but this was a sudden, unnatural frigidity. The pump beeped, prompting me to choose fuel grade. My finger hovered over the keypad. That's when I heard it, a whisper. Gentle but distinct, coming from inside the pump itself. Like a voice carried through the piping. It said something in a language I couldn't place, then in English, "Come closer." My chest tightened. I almost dropped the nozzle. Anxiety roiled in my stomach. This was insane. Maybe a hidden speaker or some elaborate prank? For a fleeting moment, I considered bailing. but fear of breaking down miles from anywhere overpowered the dread. I pressed the nozzle into my Jeep's tank, hands shaking. As the gas started pumping, the whisper turned into a hiss, like static. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, I heard, go away, repeated over and over. I couldn't handle it. I jammed the nozzle back, finishing as quickly as possible. The pump clicked. Gas spilled a bit, sloshing on the ground, reeking of chemicals. My car's gauge showed near full. Relief warred with fear. I yanked the nozzle out, letting it clatter onto the pump cradle. With my Jeep fueled, I hurried to the station door, intending to pay or at least see if I owed anything. My mind was screaming at me to leave, but some sense of decency demanded I settle up. I called out, "Hello? Sir?" No response. Inside, the station was eerily lit now. The overhead fluorescents glowed, though they flickered occasionally. The shelves looked more disorganized than before, boxes knocked over. I circled the counter, heart pounding. No one was there. The back room door stood ajar, darkness beyond it. A rustling behind me made me jump. A shape flitted across the window. I rushed out, scanning the pumps, empty. The desert wind gusted, swirling dust. The station was utterly deserted. The attendant had vanished. Then, from the corner of the building, I glimpsed a figure, a black silhouette with elongated limbs, leaning forward at an impossible angle, as though peering around the corner at me. My breath caught. 2 faint glimmers where eyes would be. We locked gazes for half a heartbeat, then it darted out of sight. My entire body trembled. This wasn't the man in coveralls. This was something else, something darker, more inhuman. I had to leave. Now. Screw paying. My life was more valuable than courtesy. I sprinted to my Jeep, jumped in, and twisted the key. The engine roared, relief flooded me. But as I shifted into drive, the radio erupted with static. A harsh whisper filled the cabin, the same chant I'd heard from inside the pump. My head ached from the unnatural sound. I jabbed the radio's power, but it wouldn't turn off. The chanting escalated, overlapping voices, some definitely not human. I stomped the gas. The Jeep lurched forward, only to stall with a violent shudder. My heart hammered. I tried again, nothing. The engine refused to catch. I cursed, glancing at the fuel gauge which read full, but the car wouldn't start. Fear clawed at me. Suddenly, the windshield darkened. I saw smears forming on the glass, as if invisible hands were pressing from the outside, leaving slick, inhuman fingerprints. Shapes slid across the glass, long, spindly digits with too many joints. My breath caught in my throat. I yanked the door handle, but it stuck. My windows wouldn't roll down either. It felt like the Jeep was being sealed in a bubble of terror. On the passenger side, the glass fogged with condensation from outside. Then, a pair of elongated handprints emerged, each finger at least twice as long as normal. They pressed gently, tapping. My mind reeled. The chanting on the radio grew louder, a swirl of voices chanting in unison, Quay Lai. Turn back. Relash shoe. Go away, over and over. I shouted, tried once more to start the engine. Still dead. Another jolt shook the Jeep, as though something heavy slammed the rear bumper. The windshield cracks spidered from a corner. Panicking, I hammered at the door with my shoulder. The lock gave. I tumbled out onto the dust, rolling painfully. Scrambling to my feet, I saw no one physically behind the Jeep, just empty desert. Yet I sensed a presence lingering. The chanting from the radio still blared inside the Jeep, warping and twisting. I stared at the station's neon sign, which flickered ominously with a dull electric hum. My reflection in the Jeep's side mirror looked pale, terrified, eyes wild. My only chance was to flee on foot and hope for rescue down the highway. I started jogging away from station number 13, ignoring the pounding in my chest. The night was cold, each breath a puff of steam. The sky overhead, moonless, was a black void pricked by stars. The station's lights receded behind me. But after 10 or 15 minutes, an odd sense of disorientation set in. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly, the road unmarked. A patch of tumbleweed scuttled across the highway. I paused to catch my breath, glancing back. My eyes widened. The station still looked just as close as before, as though I hadn't put any distance between us. Could I be turned around? Panic flared. I turned forward again, forced myself to walk. Each step felt heavier, like the asphalt was clinging to my boots. The only sound was my ragged breath and the faint echo of that chanting, which seemed to cling to the wind. No matter how far I walked, the station's dull glow remained on the horizon behind me. Desperate, I turned off the road, trudging through the desert sand, hoping to circumvent some supernatural pull. But darkness made navigation nearly impossible. Cacti loomed, menacing silhouettes. After stumbling on a rock, I cursed and rechecked my position. To my horror, I saw the station's lights again, closer this time. It was as if I'd looped back. My chest tightened. Fear threatened to consume me. I recalled the tales of vanishings. They walk away but always end up back at the station. Dread sank in. I was trapped in some nightmarish bubble. With no other options, I returned to the station's lot, breath ragged, heart hammering. The Jeep sat silent, windows still smeared with weird prints. The station's interior glowed dimly. I had a wild idea. If the station or the presence inside it demanded something, like an offering or a sacrifice, maybe I needed to face it. The notion was insane, but I was desperate. I stepped inside. The flickering lights cast dancing shadows on the walls. The shelves had changed, items rearranged or knocked over as if rummaged. The radio behind the counter hissed with static. I approached it. "Hello?" I said softly. I just want to leave. Please let me go." No answer. Then a gentle hiss from the corner. Something moved in the gloom. I turned my flashlight. The attendant, or what wore the attendant's clothes, stood there. Its face was partially visible now, a pale, elongated visage with hollow eyes. My throat constricted. It took a step forward, footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the tile floor. Then, from all around me, I heard that whispering chorus again, "Turn back. Turn back. Quaylai. Go away." Trembling, I blurted, "I'm sorry if I trespassed. I'll leave. I promise." The figure tilted its head, unblinking. Then, in a voice that crackled like an old record, it said, "You must warn them." My mind reeled. Warn them? Warn who? The figure raised a bony arm, pointing at the horizon. "All who come here. This is cursed ground. It belongs to them." A swirl of blackness seemed to ripple around the figure's limbs, as if shadows bled from its skin. I stumbled back, pressing against the counter. The station's radio flared to life, spitting out that final phrase, "Quaylai," over and over. Then, as if by a sudden gust of wind, the figure dissipated, leaving behind only a swirl of dust. The lights flickered, then popped out, plunging me into darkness. I heard the exit door slam behind me. I was alone. In the pitch black, I used my flashlight to find the exit. The door was unlatched. I stumbled outside. The first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, turning the desert into a stark grayscape. My Jeep still sat there, battered. I tried the ignition one last time. Miraculously, it turned over. The engine coughed but stayed alive. Tears pricked my eyes. Not caring about the bizarre illusions, I hit the gas, lurching onto the highway. As I sped away, the station receded in the rearview mirror, an eerie silhouette in the growing light. The chanting on my radio cut out, replaced by static, then a faint country station from somewhere. No more terrifying whispers. After a mile or two, my mind expected to see the station reappear, as if I'd never left. But no, this time, the road stretched clear, desert on both sides. I soared forward, lungs quivering with relief. Whatever demonic hold that place had, it had released me. A couple of hours later, I reached a larger highway. I found a diner, slumped into a booth, and tried to piece together what had happened. The waitress gave me an odd look, probably noticing my disheveled, haunted expression. I typed frantic notes on my phone, determined not to lose the details to shock or disbelief. It's been months since I fled station number 13. I told my story to a few close friends, but they chalked it up to exhaustion, maybe a hallucinatory breakdown from desert heat. The evidence, my Jeep's bizarre smears, the photos of the station I managed to snap, only raised eyebrows. I tried to find that station on the map, but no official records existed for gas station number 13. Google Earth shows nothing at the coordinates I pinned. The highway is real, the desert is real, but apparently, the station isn't, or it moves, or it never was. Sometimes, on lonely nights, I relive that moment, the man in coveralls telling me use number 13, the hiss from inside the pump, the swirl of shadows in the store. I can't shake the sense that I brushed against something old, malevolent, and hungry. The desert is big enough to hide 1,000 horrors, I suppose. I've heard rumors from passing truckers, tales of a certain station that appears only when you need fuel the most, in a deserted stretch of Nevada. They say if you see a single flickering light and a sign reading pump number 13, you must keep driving. Because if you stop, you risk becoming the next missing person. The next faint rumor in the desert wind. I can't confirm these stories, nor do I want to. Once was enough. I left that place with my life, but not without scars. I still hear whispers in the quiet hum of gas pumps whenever I fill my tank, like echoes of the station calling me back. My radio sometimes flickers at midnight with random static, tricking me into thinking I hear the chanting again. Maybe it's just my traumatized mind. Or maybe the station's curse left a mark on me. So, to anyone reading this, if you're ever driving across the endless highways of the Nevada desert, watch your fuel gauge. If you see a battered station labeled number 13 with a single working pump under a flickering neon sign, do not stop. I'm begging you. Drive on, no matter how low your tank, no matter how thirsty or tired you are. Because the desert holds secrets older than any road, and some stations are better left behind in the haze of legends. Remember me, and remember what I saw. Or better yet, forget the 13th pump entirely. Because once you've glimpsed its darkness, it never truly leaves you. Story number 2. Midnight Stop. My name is Howard Fields, and for the better part of 10 years, I've driven trucks across the back roads and highways of this country, night after night. You'd think I'd be used to the loneliness, the endless miles of blacktop lit only by my headlights. But something about Pennsylvania's back roads at midnight can peel away your sense of safety, leaving you vulnerable to the darkness beyond the beams. Still, I never expected to confront the terrors I found at that nameless gas station, locals call it Midnight Stop, somewhere on the outskirts of the Pennsylvania farmland. I'd heard stray rumors about it, sure. A trucker buddy told me once, watch yourself if you pass that spot after midnight. Some say it's cursed ground. We laughed it off over coffee at a roadside diner. But maybe he knew something I didn't. It was late November, and I'd just finished a drop-off near Pittsburgh. My rig rattled along country routes as I aimed toward the next destination in Scranton. The route planner suggested a faster interstate, but I was behind schedule and eager to avoid way stations. Plus, I had a sweet tooth for lonely roads and small-town lights glimmering in the distance. Night fell quicker than I expected. 1 minute, the sky glowed pink from a lingering sunset. The next, the stars blinked out behind low-hanging clouds. A raw wind swept across the farmland. My headlights illuminated patches of leafless trees, barbed wire fences, and a single-lane blacktop stretching to nowhere. By the time I passed a faded green sign reading entering Pinewood County, the clock read 1:17 a.m. My stomach growled. My coffee thermos had run dry. I'd hoped to refuel at a major truck stop, but the last station I passed seemed boarded up. The next sign of civilization was a flickering neon swirl in the distance. Maybe a bar or an all-night diner, I thought. I pressed the pedal gently, the engine humming. Around 1:45 a.m., the wind picked up, rattling the trailer. I spotted a battered billboard, Midnight Stop Gas and Groceries, next right. The sign was half gone, the paint peeling to reveal old wood. Something about the name struck me as a joke, like a cheap horror movie set. Still, I needed gas, or I'd risk running on fumes by dawn. So I took the turn, bouncing onto a narrower road that cut through farmland. Eventually, I glimpsed a weak glow, a gas station canopy, a single building with an old steel sign shaped like a gas pump, stenciled "Midnight Stop" across the top. 2 pumps stood beneath the canopy. A sliver of light leaked from inside the store. No other cars. I eased my rig into the lot, gravel crunching under the tires. The place looked normal enough, if a bit run down. The asphalt had cracks sprouting weeds, and one overhead light flickered. A sign on the door read "Open at sundown, we close at dawn," with a cartoonish moon and star scrawled beneath. The entire aesthetic might have been charming, had the aura not been so forbidding. The pumps, the lonely building, the hush of the night, it set my nerves on edge. But a man's got to eat, and my truck needed diesel. So I parked near the pumps, left the engine idling, and hopped out. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks. As I stood there, a prickle of awareness crawled up my spine. The station seemed too quiet. No wind, no crickets. Just the hum of the overhead lamp. I told myself to quit imagining spooks and start fueling. I swiped my card at the pump, surprisingly modern, with a digital screen. But it spat out an error. "See cashier inside," it read. Typical. Sighing, I prepared to go in, but something flickered in my peripheral vision. Movement near the station's side window. I paused, shining a small flashlight I keep in my jacket. Through the dirty glass, I saw a silhouette, someone standing inside, near the far corner of the store. The figure looked female, with long hair and a slender build. She stood stock still, head turned as if looking toward me. For a moment, I could swear our eyes met. My heart thumped unexpectedly. I called out, "Hey, you open?" The figure didn't react. Just stared. Maybe the reflection caused it to appear that she was looking. "Hello?" I repeated louder. But still no movement. A faint chill tiptoed along my arms. Unsettled, I shook it off and walked to the door. The figure slipped away from the window in a blur. The moment I pushed open the door, a tinny bell jangled overhead. A gust of warm air and the stale smell of coffee and cleaning solution greeted me. The interior was typical: a few shelves of snacks, a fridge with beverages, a corner for basic groceries. A single overhead light flickered near a dusty magazine rack. The front counter was to the left, behind bulletproof glass. Except there was no clerk behind it. In fact, the place seemed deserted. The silence pressed in. Then, from behind a rack of chips, a voice, "Need help, bud?" Startled, I turned to see a tall, gaunt man step out. He wore a name tag that read Jimmy, with the station's logo. He had watery eyes and sunken cheeks, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't hear you come in." For a moment, I debated mentioning the woman I saw through the window. Something in me held back, though. The vibe here was off. I forced a smile. "Yeah, I need to pay for diesel." Pump wouldn't take my card. He nodded slowly. "Sure. Pump 1 or 2? Guess pump 2? I've got a truck out there." The card reader said, "See cashier." Jimmy's eyes flicked behind me as if expecting someone else. Then he rummaged in a drawer, pulled out a battered logbook. "Diesel, right? We do prepay only at night." He named an amount. I handed him the cash, my hand trembling slightly from the cold or maybe nerves. He gave me a quick once-over. "You on the road long?" I shrugged. "Couple days. Headed north." I glanced around. "Quiet night?" Jimmy's expression darkened. "Always is, after midnight." Then, almost to himself, he added, "Wish they'd closed earlier." I tried to parse that, but he cleared his throat. "Anyway, you're set. Pump's on." Then he retreated behind the bulletproof glass, eyes not quite meeting mine. I grabbed a coffee from a self-serve machine. Lukewarm. As I sipped, I mustered courage to ask, "This place, is it always so empty?" Jimmy's gaze twitched. "We get passers-by, mostly after dark. You know, we only open nights, a tradition. Some local story about how the station's owners wanted to cater to night haulers." "Hey, He gave a weak laugh that died quickly. I glanced at a newspaper clipping pinned to a corkboard near the restrooms. The headline read, "Triple homicide at local gas station." Dated some years back. The station name was half lost in the fold, but I recognized the address. My heartbeat quickened. So the rumors were true, a mass murder had happened here. Before I could read further, Jimmy barked, "We keep that for insurance reasons, buddy. Old tragedy. Let's not dwell on it." His tone was sharper. I backed off. Still, my curiosity gnawed. What happened? He lowered his voice. 20 years ago, a drifter, or maybe more than one, they came in late. Shot the clerk, 2 customers. Left no witnesses except some college kid who hid in the stockroom. Ever since, folks say weird things happen. Some claim to see a woman's ghost in the window or hear noises after hours. The memory of that female silhouette flashed through my mind. A woman's ghost? He shrugged. One of the victims was a young woman. They never caught the killer. Rumors swirl about how she wanders the lot, seeking help. He pursed his lips. Could be just stories. But my gut twisted, remembering that unwavering stare from behind the glass. I tried to hide my unease. Anyway, thanks for the coffee. I turned to leave. Jimmy called after me, voice strangely hollow, "If you hear anything odd, ignore it, yeah?" Sometimes the wind whistles through the vents. I forced a nod and stepped outside, the wind biting. The gas pump stood silent, the nozzle still in place. Flicking the handle, I realized the pump had already filled my tank automatically. Strange, usually you have to hold it or lock it. I replaced the nozzle, feeling that creeping sense of disquiet. Something was definitely weird here. I hopped into my truck, started the engine. The humming diesel was a comfort, a promise of escape. Quickly, I eased the truck away from the pump, heading for the exit. Checking my side mirror, I caught a fleeting glimpse, a woman standing at the station's window again, her face half obscured by darkness, but eyes shining in the fluorescent glow. My breath hitched. Then, just as I turned onto the highway, the lights behind me flickered and died. The station was swallowed by the night. The only illumination was my truck's red tail lights. I felt an urge to call out or stop, but something told me to keep driving, keep going. Another mile along the road, relief started to bloom. I'd gotten away from that place, from the haunted hush. And that's when my radio crackled to life. Static at first, then a faint voice, like a woman whispering. I nearly swerved off the road. The voice repeated something inaudible, or maybe just static. Then it cut out. The hush in the cab grew oppressive. "Focus, Howard," I told myself. The rig rumbled onward. But my thoughts churned. Could a ghost have followed me? Maybe my mind was playing tricks. I turned up a music station for comfort, but all I got was static. No signals out here. Just me and the road. Some 15 minutes passed, or so I guessed. The clock read 2:10 a.m. The desert gave way to rolling farmland, faint outlines of barns in the gloom. The truck rumbled steadily. I tried to calm my nerves. Then the engine sputtered. My dash lights flickered. No, not now," I muttered, gently pumping the accelerator. Another sputter, and the engine resumed. The dash lights stabilized. Something's wrong, I thought. This truck's well maintained. Could a ghostly presence sabotage an engine? I forced a laugh at my own paranoia. But I couldn't shake the ominous weight on my shoulders. My rearview mirror reflected only blackness. Or was something moving back there? Finally, the road turned under a row of trees. I decided I'd pull over for a moment, check the engine, get some air. Maybe call a friend from my phone, though coverage was iffy. I slowed, swung onto the shoulder, and parked. The night was a solid mass of silence. Stepping out, I left the engine idling. My flashlight caught the gleam of my trailer's side. That's when I saw them, sets of long scratch marks across the paint, like claws had raked the metal. My heart lurched. They definitely weren't there before. Each slash was about a foot long, in parallel lines. A chill shot up my spine. Could something have done this at the station? Or had it followed me, riding on the trailer unseen? My breath puffed white. I scanned the darkness behind me, expecting to see a shape lurking. Nothing. Then my eyes caught the back window of the trailer's cab. In the thin layer of dust, a message was scrawled, letters jagged, as if carved by nails. Don't come back. My blood ran cold. I'd never seen such a thing before. Conflicting thoughts battered my mind. Did the station's ghost woman do this? Did the murderer's spirit cling to me? Or was it something else entirely? Lightning wasn't cracking. No thunder. Just an empty night. The only response was my own pounding heart. I slammed the door shut, jumped back into the driver's seat, and locked all doors. My phone had no signal. Great. The engine's rumble gave some comfort, but sweat beaded on my forehead. Could I simply drive to the next town, find a motel, and pray I wasn't losing my mind? I put the truck in gear, eyes scanning the mirrors. Then I saw it, a reflection in my side mirror, a shape perched atop my trailer. Or so it seemed. A blur of something crouching near the rear edge. My stomach seized. Without thinking, I gunned the accelerator, the trailer lurching. Maybe I could shake it off. The mirror showed movement, a figure sliding across the trailer's roof. I couldn't see details, just a silhouette with unnaturally angled limbs. My throat constricted. My only thought was to outrun it. But outrun a demon? A ghost? A figment? The truck roared down the highway. The shape clung to the trailer, unmoving. The next curve approached too fast. I braked, tires squealing. The shape vanished from the mirror. My heart hammered. Up ahead, headlights glowed, an oncoming vehicle. I honked, flashing my brights, hoping to signal I was in trouble. But as the car passed, it didn't even slow. They probably saw me as just another frantic trucker. In my mind, I was screaming, something's on top of my rig. When I glanced back at the mirror, the shape was gone. Only the dark farmland behind me, the scratch marks on my trailer, the radio crackling faintly. Then a voice hissed through the speakers, "Don't come back." She's waiting. She's waiting, my heart battered my ribs. I grabbed the dial, turned it off, but the voice persisted even with the radio off, as if the speakers themselves produced the sound. A final hiss, then silence. By 3 a.m., I was on the brink of madness. My gut told me I had to do something about that cursed message, "Don't come back," and the clause. Could I find a policeman? A service station? Anywhere? But the roads were deserted. My mind circled back to the notion that maybe the only way to break this hold was to return to the station. Insane, right? But every time I tried to head away, my engine sputtered or the radio hissed. Maybe the station's ghostly occupant demanded some confrontation. The thought of returning to that place made me shudder. But I was desperate for answers. So, with trembling resolve, I turned the truck around at a wide gravel spot. A sense of foreboding settled over me like a lead blanket. The drive back felt endless, each mile heavier with dread. The scratched trailer squeaked behind me. Once, I glimpsed something in the side mirror, shadows shifting. By 3:30 a.m., the station's flickering neon sign came into view again. My heart pounded so violently I could taste fear. Oddly, the station's pumps glowed again, though I'd seen them black out earlier. Maybe the power was intermittent. Or maybe the place had a mind of its own. I pulled into the lot. The overhead canopy lights hummed, but the store's interior was dark. No sign of the clerk or of that unknown woman. I parked near the edge, leaving my headlights on, engine idling. Mustering courage, I stepped out. The wind howled softly, carrying an undertone of whispering, like a chorus of distant voices. I forced my legs to move, crossing the asphalt toward the store door. The station door was locked. In the glass, I faintly saw my reflection, and behind it, a shape. My heartbeat thundered. Then I realized the shape was inside, rummaging behind the counter. Forcing the handle did nothing. So I banged on the glass. "Hey! Let me in!" I called. The shape turned, revealing itself in the dim interior. It was Jimmy, the clerk, pale as chalk. He approached the door and unlocked it, his face devoid of emotion. I stumbled inside, and the door shut behind me with a clang. I tried to speak, but Jimmy raised a shaking hand, pointing to the corner. A figure stood there, partially in shadow. It was the woman from the window, long hair, a pale face. She wore a stained blouse and had eyes that gleamed unnaturally. She stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Jimmy's voice trembled. She's the reason we're here. She can't rest. I swallowed, stepping back. What do you mean? He exhaled shakily. Years ago, after that triple murder, her spirit's been wandering. Some nights, you see her reflection in the glass, or in the pumps. You can't help but see it. And once you see her, she latches on. She doesn't let you leave. I recalled the illusions on the road, the sabotage to my truck. But who slashed my trailer? That message? Jimmy's expression twisted with sorrow. She's not alone. The killer, or some evil echo of him, also prowls these grounds. People vanish here. The victim's ghost wants help, the murderer's shade wants more victims. This station's cursed, locked in their conflict. He coughed, pressing a hand to his chest. I tried to help you earlier, but once midnight passes, it's strong. Hard to break free. The woman's figure in the corner flickered, like a badly tuned TV signal. She lifted her hand, pointing at me. Don't run, her voice rasped, echoing in the still air. I nearly fainted from terror. Outside, the canopy lights dimmed, the wind moaned. My heartbeat hammered. So how do we break this? I asked, desperate. I just want to get away. Jimmy seemed uncertain. Some say if you confront the killer's spirit or release the woman, the station's curse lifts. Others claim you must survive till dawn. I don't know. He glanced at the woman. Sometimes she tries to warn travelers, but it's never enough. At that moment, a harsh scraping sound came from the store's rear door. My blood chilled. The murderer's shade, perhaps? The door rattled violently. The woman at the corner flickered again, her mouth opening in a silent scream. A pressure built in my ears, an invisible force pushing at the store's walls. Jimmy shouted, "Follow me." He led me toward a side hall. The woman's figure started to drift after us, not walking, but gliding across the floor. The store lights flickered in staccato bursts, revealing her face twisted in agony. The scraping at the back door grew louder, like claws raking the metal. A voice hissed through the vents, "Don't come back, we hunger." In a panic, we found ourselves in a cramped storage room. Jimmy rummaged for something among old crates. "There's a side exit," he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. "We can slip out, maybe get to your truck and go." I nodded, panting. The store seemed to tilt, as if the foundation itself wavered under supernatural tension. Then the overhead light popped, plunging us into gloom. The only illumination came from my flashlight. In that wavering beam, we saw the back door slowly creaking open on its own. Something dark, tall, with distorted limbs, stood in the threshold. My flashlight flickered off, then back on. The shape jerked forward in spasmodic movements. I caught a glimpse of eyes reflecting dull red. My brain screamed, "Kill it or run." Jimmy thrust a crowbar into my hand, grabbing another for himself. The shape hissed, half human, half shadow. The presence of raw malice flooded the tiny space. I could barely breathe. Another unearthly screech from the woman ghost echoed, as if she was behind the shape or tangled with it. My vision blurred. The shape lunged. Jimmy swung the crowbar, striking an arm that felt more like smoke than flesh. The shape recoiled, a guttural moan escaping it. I took the chance to yank the door open. Jimmy and I scrambled out into the side lot, stumbling over old crates. The woman's ghost voice reverberated in my head, "Run, run." We found ourselves outside, near the corner of the building. The sky was the darkest shade of midnight. My truck stood beyond, silent. The shape emerged from the side door, looming. I forced my leaden legs to move, sprinting toward my rig. Jimmy followed, panting. The shape shrieked behind us, that demonic cry slicing the night. Clouds swirled overhead, and for an instant, the moon broke through, illuminating a monster of shadow, elongated limbs, face contorted with rage. We clambered into my truck's cab, slammed the doors. I cranked the ignition, praying it would start. The engine groaned, coughed once, then roared to life. Relief so intense it nearly made me sob. The creature pounded on the passenger window, leaving smears of darkness that glowed faintly. Next to it, I saw the woman's face in the side mirror, her eyes brimming with sorrow. She mouthed something, "Help me." My chest ached. But I couldn't. Or maybe I was too cowardly. I jammed the accelerator. The truck surged forward, tires squealing in the gravel. Jimmy clung to the seat. The shape shrieked again, left behind in a swirl of dust. The woman's reflection vanished. We sped down the highway for miles, heart thumping. By the time the eastern horizon bled pink, we were well clear of that cursed station. Jimmy said little, just stared at his hands. At a truck stop near a small town, we finally stopped. The sun's warmth felt like a benediction, chasing away the night's horrors. Jimmy parted ways shortly after, hitching a ride to see family. I was left with my rig, the claw marks still etched on the trailer's side. Over coffee at a diner, I tried to rationalize it. Could it have been a bizarre group hallucination? A twisted dream? But the marks were real, the memory seared into my mind. And that scrawled message on the trailer, "Don't come back," was etched deep in the paint. In the months that followed, I scoured newspapers for mention of station number 13 or a triple homicide. Found scraps of articles referencing an old unsolved murder spree in a night shift gas station near the farmland. Rumors of sightings, ghosts, unexplained vanishings. No official closure. The place apparently still stands, though most drivers never see it. I've tried telling my story to a few trucking buddies. Some shrugged it off, others listened wide-eyed, but none asked for directions. Not that I could give them precise coordinates. The memory of the route is fuzzy, as if my mind refuses to recall the exact location. Maybe that's for the best. Still, on lonely highways at night, I sometimes catch a whisper through my radio static or see a reflection of a woman's face in the passenger window. My heart seizes every time. I floor the accelerator, half expecting to see claw marks reappear. They never do, but I feel her presence, the ghost who wanted help or the demon that wanted my soul. Station number 13 remains a mystery, an unsolved knot of horror in Pennsylvania's back roads. If you ever find a gas station that only opens at dusk and closes at dawn, with a name that nobody's heard of, do yourself a favor, keep driving. Don't stop. Because once you stand on that cracked asphalt, once you see that figure in the glass, you may never leave unmarked. Consider this my warning, from one traveler to another, the midnight desert roads hold secrets older than the highways themselves. And sometimes, at an old station under flickering neon lights, you'll find the past waiting, hungry for your future. Story number 3. The Last Stop. I wish I'd never taken that damned road. But back then, I had no idea what lay ahead, just miles of dusty asphalt and the vague promise of a paycheck at the end. My name is Glenn Harding, and I'm a long-haul trucker who's seen my share of weirdness on the highways crisscrossing this country. But nothing, not the stories of haunted rest stops or the rumored UFO sightings in the desert, prepared me for that final station on the Texas border, the one people quietly call the last stop. The place that swallowed me whole, body and soul. It was late summer in Texas, the kind of heat that makes the horizon shimmer and your brain feel half-fried. I'd been driving since dawn, leaving Laredo after a delayed drop-off, trying to reach El Paso by morning. My route cut through the southwestern edge of Texas, near the Mexico border, a stretch known for sparse towns, dead phone signals, and dryness so thick you could taste it. The sun hovered low, painting the sky molten orange. My rig rattled along a lonely 2-lane highway. The map showed no major stops for 100 miles, and my fuel gauge hovered precariously near a quarter tank. I cursed under my breath. Maybe I should have fueled up earlier. Then I saw a hand-painted sign leaning by the roadside, gas and snacks, 10 miles. Next to it, in smaller scrawled letters, last stop before dead zone. That's what people in these parts called the phone silent stretch of desert. Once you went past, you had no cell service for hours. I shrugged. Perfect time to fill up and snag a coffee. I pressed on, letting my engine growl in the cooling air. The sky turned purple, then deepened to black. Stars burst into view. The desert at night can be breathtaking, but also unsettlingly vast. Eventually, the flicker of fluorescent light rose in the distance, a single gas station canopy, overshadowed by a big sign reading simply, "Last Stop." The building was small, squat, with a gravel lot and two ancient-looking pumps. A battered ice chest stood out front, next to a single door marked open. I pulled in, my headlights cutting across the station facade. The place looked deserted. I parked beside one pump, silver metal with chipped paint, and noticed a flickering overhead light. Moths swarmed. The rest of the station, except for the inside lights, was bathed in darkness. No other vehicles. The old saying about too quiet flickered through my mind. But I shook it off. Middle of nowhere, dead of night, of course it's quiet. I killed the engine, hopped out. The air hit me in the face, still warm and stagnant despite the late hour. Dust swirled around my boots. I grabbed my wallet, walked to the pump. The nozzle was old-fashioned, with a metal flip lever. When I lifted it, the pump screen remained blank. I squinted at it, tapped once. No power. Maybe I needed to pay inside, like in the old days. My mouth felt parched, so I decided I'd grab a cold soda, too. The door jingled when I opened it, the little bell overhead giving a weak clang. Inside, the station store was claustrophobic, a single narrow aisle of dusty candy bars, shelves of potato chips, cooler doors rattling with old refrigeration. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead. At first, I saw no clerk, just a silent countertop. Then a figure emerged from behind a bead curtain in the back. He wore a baggy uniform, a name tag I couldn't read, his face partially cast in shadow by the overhead light. "Evening," he said, voice flat. "Need help?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, pump outside seems off. Need to fill my rig. Also, you got cold drinks?" He nodded vaguely. "Cooler's on the left." He said it with an odd monotone, no real inflection. Then he stood there, hardly blinking. My stomach did a small flip. Something was off about his posture. He stood too upright, arms at his sides, not shifting or fidgeting like normal folks. I cleared my throat, trying to ignore the prickles on my neck. I grabbed a soda from the cooler. Warm air rushed out instead of cold, making me grimace. The cooler wasn't doing its job. The soda can felt barely chilled, if at all. But I was desperate for any liquid, so I brought it to the counter. He stared at me, unblinking. No small talk. Just waited. I coughed. "So, about that gas, you mind turning on the pump?" He gave a tiny nod, rummaged under the counter, and produced a battered control panel, pressing a button. "Pump's on," he said, voice still monotone. I noticed the radio behind the counter, an ancient device with a dial, currently silent. Then it clicked on by itself, hissing static. A burst of laughter came through, distorted, like a choked cackle. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, then cut off. The clerk didn't react. "Old radio, huh?" I tried to joke, but my voice quavered. No response. The clerk simply stared. I suppressed a shiver, paid for my soda, and hurried outside. The door jingled behind me. Back at the pump, I jammed the nozzle in my tank, flipped the handle. Gas started flowing. Relief. My eyes darted around the deserted lot. The station sign flickered overhead, "Last Stop." Moths battered themselves against the plastic covering. Off in the distance, the desert stretched into black oblivion. A gust of wind kicked up, blowing grit across my boots. I scowled, turning my collar up. Then, from behind me, I swore I heard a faint whisper. I spun around, nobody there. My truck's headlights cast long shadows. The store's windows glowed yellow, but I couldn't see the clerk. The place looked empty again. As I faced the pump to check the fuel progress, the whisper returned, clearer. Sounded like it was coming from under the pump. I bent down, ears straining. Couldn't catch the words, but it was definitely a voice, low, urgent, almost chanting. My heart thumped. Maybe a radio or a speaker glitch. This station was old, after all. My hair stood on end. Something about that voice radiated dread. Then the pump clicked off. Full tank. I eased the nozzle out, replaced it. The whisper died away. Trying to compose myself, I climbed into my cab, turned the key. The engine roared to life. Good. At least I could get out of here. As I backed up to swing onto the highway, my headlights swept across the edges of the station lot. My breath caught. Dozens of silhouettes stood at the road's perimeter, men, women, maybe children, staring in my direction. Or at least facing me, but I couldn't see their eyes. Each figure was motionless, hands limp at their sides. The closest was maybe 20 feet away. The farthest receded into the darkness. My blood froze. I blinked, hard hammering. Had they come out of nowhere? How had I not heard them approach? Slowly, as if in sync, every figure took one step closer. My headlights revealed their faces were wrong. Hollow eye sockets, no eyes at all. Empty flesh where eyes should be. My mouth went dry. My foot fumbled for the gas pedal. But in that brief, paralyzing second, I saw among them a woman whose mouth hung open in a silent scream, cheeks stained as if with tears or blood. Another figure in tattered clothes raised a hand, the fingers ending in black stumps. All stood, fixated on me. Or so it seemed. Because no eyes. My instincts exploded with panic. I stomped the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, away from the station. The silhouettes parted slightly, letting me pass, but as I roared onto the highway, I saw them in my side mirror, still standing, still watching. A shiver raked my spine. Exiting the station's driveway, I sped along the dark two-lane road. My phone read 2:03 a.m. Typically, I'd have decent coverage near these border highways. But my phone bars were at 0. The dead zone, indeed. The station had been my last link to civilization. Now I was alone in the desert, adrenaline surging. I tried my radio, seeking music to calm my nerves. Nothing but static. Then, abruptly, that same laughter from the station's radio crackled through my speakers, crooked, unnatural giggles. I slammed the radio off, heart racing. Another glitch? Or something worse? Miles passed in unnerving silence, my headlights carving out a lonely tunnel in the black. The horror I'd seen, a crowd of eyeless beings, kept replaying in my mind. Sleep deprivation, a trick of the desert? Couldn't be. It was too real. Then the engine sputtered. My stomach flipped. No, come on, baby, I muttered, coaxing the truck. The gauge read full. Mechanically, the rig was fine. Yet it coughed again, losing speed. Panicked, I guided the truck to the shoulder. The engine died. Darkness swallowed me, save for the dim glow of the dash. I tried the ignition, just clicking. Dread coiled in my gut. I slapped the steering wheel, glancing at the desert outside. The wind had died. The night was eerily still. My phone remained useless. I was stranded. I sat there, heart pounding. Was it a mechanical failure, or something supernatural? Then, out of nowhere, the laughter returned, muffled, as if emanating from under the truck. My blood turned to ice. I twisted around, scanning the darkness. Nothing. The laughter rose in pitch, echoing in the cab. Like a malicious child giggling, but layered with static. My chest constricted. Abruptly, it stopped. Silence crashed down. My ears rang. Then came a new sound, scratching. A gentle scrape along the outside of my trailer, near the back. My mouth went dry. I flicked on the interior cabin light, as if that could protect me. The scratching grew louder, moving along the side of the trailer, heading toward the driver's door. I clenched the door lock. Something brushed the side mirror. A fleeting shape? My pulse hammered. In that moment, I recalled the images from the station, eyeless figures. Could they have followed me? Or was one of them hitching a ride somehow? My mind screamed, stay put or run. Instinct said to remain locked inside. But then a dull thump hit the driver's side panel. I yelped. The handle jiggled. The door shook. A rattling breath escaped me. If I sat here, I might get pulled out by force. Gathering every shred of courage, I slammed my fist into the horn. The blare echoed across the desert night. The rattling paused. Then, from behind the trailer, a voice hissed. I couldn't make out words, but it sounded furious. Or hungry. I yanked the door handle on the passenger side, ready to bail out and run. Before I could, the truck engine suddenly coughed to life, unprompted. The headlights flared on. My radio crackled, that insane laughter returning. Terrified, I jammed the gearshift into drive, stomping the pedal. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on loose gravel. Something scraped along the side, but the rig kept going. I roared down the highway, hands shaking on the wheel. My heart hammered so loudly it drowned out the engine. The laughter on the radio died again, replaced by heavy static. Then quiet. For a few breathless minutes, I simply drove, not daring to stop, not daring to look in the mirrors. Eventually, logic reasserted itself. I was physically okay, the truck was moving. Maybe the worst was behind me. But I felt tainted, like the station had left a malevolent trace on me. My muscles ached from tension. The horizon began to lighten. Dawn was near. The desert took on a muted gray hue. The engine ran smoothly now, as if nothing had happened. My phone bars suddenly returned, 2, then 3, then full service. I exhaled, letting relief trickle in. If I could just find a rest stop or a diner with people. I spotted a sign for a small border town, San Adeline, 20 miles. Perfect. I forced the truck onward, ignoring the primal fear that still smoldered. Soon, I'd be among humans again. I'd survive. Sunlight broke over the desert. By the time I reached San Adeline, I found a modest trucker diner. I parked, stepping out into the mild morning warmth, scanning for any sign of them. Eyeless shapes, laughter, anything. Nothing but normalcy. The diner bustled with local ranchers. I nearly collapsed with relief. Over a stiff black coffee, I tried to tell my story to a fellow driver. He listened politely, eyebrows raised. Then he shook his head. I've heard rumors about that station near the border. But nobody can ever find it again in daylight. Some say if you see it at night, it's an omen. I nodded absently. A waitress overheard. She frowned, said in a low voice, my cousin's ex-boyfriend vanished round there. Found his rig a week later, empty. People talk about ghosts, a mass murderer, or something worse. She left it at that, as if afraid to elaborate. I finished my meal, said goodbye, planning to push on. But as I returned to my truck, a fresh wave of horror sank in. Across my trailer's side, new scratch marks had appeared overnight, symbols or letters I couldn't decipher. And scrawled in dust on the rear windshield, not yours anymore. My heart lurched. I wiped at the message, trembling. Nobody around me seemed to notice or care. When I turned the ignition this time, the truck sputtered but started. I drove off, mind swirling with dread and confusion. That day, I made it to El Paso, delivered my load, and tried to forget. But even now, months later, nightmares plague me. Dreams of a station shimmering in the desert heat, a clerk who stares without blinking, a radio laughing in the dead of night, and a sea of eyeless silhouettes waiting at the edge of the light. Some nights, I'm afraid I'll see them again on my route, afraid that my truck will stall, and I'll hear that laughter creeping through the speakers. Or that I'll pass a sign for the last stop and realize I can't resist the pull. They say nobody truly escapes that station if it chooses you. The next time I drive that route, my engine might fail for good. And I'll be just another rumor drifting in the desert wind, another missing driver whose rig is found with the door open, no sign of the driver, but eerie messages scratched on the metal. Because something out there wants us. And the final warning etched in my mind remains. Don't come back. But it's never that simple, is it? The desert has a way of calling you, especially after dark, when your rational mind gives way to shadows. And if you ever see a lonely station at the border, open only after sundown, I beg you, drive on. Don't stop. Keep going until dawn kisses the horizon. Because some places are not meant for the living. And once you cross that threshold, you may never leave.